Good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning. I wonder first if we can start on Theresa May's comments in relation to human rights. This is about the concern a lot of people have about how we deal with the threat of terrorism. And she says she is prepared to change the way we look at human rights legislation if that will strengthen her hand.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a complete and rather cynical distraction from the much more difficult questions. We've heard this morning, for instance, that one of the perpetrators of this wicked terrorist attack on London Bridge was in Italy, came into the United Kingdom, even though he was on an EU database, alerting the authorities to the possible danger that he posed. And yet Theresa May has a plan of taking it out of the European Union in a way which will weaken and possibly entirely restrict our ability to access those databases in the future. That's the kind of thing we should be talking about. That's the kind of thing for which she should provide an answer. How is she going to ensure that with her rather hard and extreme interpretation of Brexit, she's not going to jeopardize our security further by cutting us off from those valuable databases? Human rights legislation did not in any way cause these awful attacks in Manchester and London. And Theresa May has a track record, I'm afraid, of making these explosive but totally misleading claims. You'll remember a few years ago she claimed that someone wasn't being deported from this country under human rights provisions because they owned a cat. And that turned out to be completely untrue. I really think it's time, and I think we should just do the British people the honour, if you like, and show them respect by actually focusing on the concrete issues which we need to answer as a country as we try and keep ourselves safer after these two awful terrorist attacks in recent weeks.
Well, security has become the primary issue. Brexit previously had been the major issue. There is a link clearly between the two. Certainly the Lib Dems are making that in connection with security and the access to information we may or may not have post-Brexit.
Yes, exactly. Now, this gets a little bit techie, but let me try and simplify it. Theresa May has said she's declared, in one of the very few things she's actually revealed about Brexit, having sort of ducked almost all other detailed questions about it over the last 51 days in this election campaign, but she has said that the one thing she's absolutely clear about is that we will not in any way abide by European laws, rulings, and judgments from the European Court of Justice. If she sticks to that, it will make it illegal for 27 other countries in the European Union to continue to share that very valuable data, which our police forces, our border forces, our intelligence agencies use on a huge scale every day of every week at the moment to go after and apprehend would-be criminals and would-be terrorists, because they simply legally would not be able to share that data with a country, the United Kingdom, which under Theresa May's plan would not abide by the rules and data protection rules and so on, which underpin the way that those databases operate. And I think it is that kind of thing for which I had hoped we would get some answers during this general election campaign, because they're the kind of concrete decisions that the next Parliament will need to take. And what is such a pity is we've had a 6-7 week campaign where Theresa May claimed it was all about Brexit, and then has basically run for the hills and hasn't said anything of any substantive significance about Brexit at all.
Your party has made it very clear that you are prepared to ignore the referendum on Brexit.
No.
You are quite happy to ignore the fact that most people in this country said they want out of the EU.
No, that's not our position at all. Our position, which incidentally was first promoted not by Liberal Democrats, but promoted by David Davis and John Redwood some years ago, is that there will be a huge gap between the decision we took as a country last year. I regret it, but you're quite right. That decision was taken and stands, which is we took a decision in a referendum to leave the European Union. But there will be a considerable amount of time and a huge gap between what was promised to the British people then, £350 million for the NHS, remember that, a VAT cut, an economic utopia and so on, and the reality of the content, the detailed content of any deal that Theresa May brings back if she's Prime Minister after, or indeed Jeremy Corbyn. And then the question becomes, not having a second referendum, not rerunning last year's referendum at all, having a first look and a first referendum at the actual deal itself, which will affect everything from how our fishermen fish, our farmers farm, how our universities operate, how our manufacturers in a great manufacturing city like this in Sheffield continue to export to Europe and so on. And then the question is it for Theresa May to make that judgment whether that deal is right for us on her own, in her Downing Street bunker? Is it just the politicians who are entitled to decide? Or can we also, the rest of us, get a look in by way of a referendum? Not a second referendum, a first referendum on the actual deal when that finally materialises.
OK, if I may, can I ask you, we've used the word deal a few times there. Can you just be absolutely clear on the Lib Dem position going into this general election? I know it's been suggested there won't be an alliance, but are you playing with words here? Because people have been talking about some progressive arrangement between the parties, possibly with the SNP, possibly with Labour. Are there no deals of any kind possible? Or is this a bit of a grey area where maybe they just call it something else and there'll be, the occasional deal on things? Is that still a possibility?
Tim Farron has been abundantly clear, which is that there is not going to be any coalition, no deals, no pacts of any description. Listen, if there is a hung parliament, in other words, no one has an absolute majority. By the way, I don't remotely think that's likely. I think the Conservatives are going to win. I don't think they deserve a majority, but I think they're certainly going to get one. But setting my sort of predictions aside, which often have been wrong in the past, so they might be wrong again, if in the theoretical possibility that no one has an absolute majority, the country then has a choice. You either then have a minority government that needs to sort of beg and scrape for every time it needs to try and get the votes on its side in Parliament, every time there's a vote in Parliament, and it governs in Whitehall as a minority administration, or we go back to the polls all over again after a short period of time. That's the basic choice, but I personally think it's highly unlikely to happen that way.